Belarusian chaos. Tanks won't start. Air defense systems aren't working. Lukashenko is furious. Minsk is in turmoil. Military apocalypse in China. Xi is raging. The troops have been decapitated. China is on the verge of a coup. The country is shocked by high-profile arrests. The regime is cracking. Friends are turning into enemies. Shock. Russia is bankrupting the West. Technologies are turning into death missiles. Europe is in shock. And the Russian mafia is operating right under the Germans' noses. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I am Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events.
There's real turmoil in Minsk. The mustachioed dictator woke up in a cold sweat and realized that his army might turn out to be as much of a fake as the Kyiv in 3 days plan. Lukashenko has ordered a sudden and large-scale inspection of the armed forces. Do you know how this translates from the language of propaganda? It means, I don't trust anyone, I'm afraid of a coup, and I want to know if my rusty machines can at least drive out of the garage.
By order of the president, a large-scale inspection of the armed forces has begun. It will be comprehensive in nature and will consist of several stages. The inspection activities are of a sudden nature.
The Secretary of the Security Council also stated directly that the inspection is being conducted taking into account the Russian experience in the special operation. In other words, they are learning from the Russians how to adopt the experience of shameful failures and complete vulnerability to drones. By the way, the main fear of the potato dictator has become drones. Lukashenko understands. If something flies in, his air defense will simply sleep through it. That's why they're now in a panic, trying to come up with at least some kind of protection for their bases.
The concept of the inspection has been approved by the president. The president said that he will personally take part in this inspection. But as for what comments he will make to the Belta units and when, he will decide that himself.
And the funniest thing is how they started the inspection, with storage bases where Soviet junk has been gathering dust for years. They're trying to bring tanks and combat vehicles out of storage. The ultimate goal is to drive 15 to 20 kilometers. Just think about it. For them, it's a feat if the tank simply starts up and manages to go 20 kilometers without falling apart along the way. It's not really an army, more like a vintage machinery enthusiast club.
A group suddenly arrived and handed an order to the commander of the military unit. A report was heard on the state of affairs at the weapons and military equipment storage base. During this inspection, the plan to address the shortcomings identified last year will be checked.
Lukashenko got seriously worked up. The potato president announced that he would personally take part in the inspection. He doesn't trust the reports and wants to feel every bolt himself. The dictator is in a frenzy. He sees how the Ukrainian armed forces are destroying Russian equipment and realizes that his toy army wouldn't last a day in a real war. This whole spectacle with inspections is an attempt to hide the regime's primal fear of inevitable collapse. While Lukashenko, gripped by primal fear, is conducting sudden inspections of his army and trying to start up Soviet scrap metal, Volodymyr Zelensky dropped a bombshell in Vilnius. The president of Ukraine harshly criticized the self-proclaimed dictator. This is the truth that they fear in Minsk. Shade drone operators are working from Belarusian soil. Factories are working for Putin's war, and the country's territory has become a real testing ground for the much-vaunted Orlan drones. And the fact that Lukashenko allows his spits more than he allows his own people is indisputable.
Lukashenko has given his white spits more rights than the people of Belarus, unfortunately. There was a chance in 2020 to change this, and I am sure there will be another chance. But back then, there simply wasn't enough support for Belarus. And now we all feel how much more difficult, how much more expensive, how much more dangerous it has become for everyone because of Belarus's dependence on Moscow.
These words were also confirmed by Ukraine's foreign intelligence. According to the Ukrainian parliament, 80% of Belarusian enterprises officially work for the Russian defense industry. Lukashenko has turned the republic into a giant repair shop and a raw materials appendage for the occupier's army. Intelligence confirms while Putin is breaking his teeth in Ukraine, his mustachioed vassal in the rear is repairing damaged tanks, churning out drones, and smuggling sanctioned technologies across the border. Sanctioned technologies. Belarus has become the main loophole in the sanctions fence.
Belarus remains the main and only one. As Russia's ally on the Western Front, it continues to serve as Russia's rear, supplying ammunition, unmanned systems, and also repairing Russian military equipment. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Belarusian military-industrial complex has been integrated into the Russian one.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
while Putin hides his nutcracker in the fields of another country. The SBU paid a visit to his base in Russia and delivered a powerful strike, the Kapustin Yar testing range. It is from there that the enemy launches its so-called Wunderwaffe, with which it tries to scare the world. But for Ukrainian drones, there are no forbidden zones. The myth of the invulnerability of Russian facilities is crumbling to dust. Watch the report to see how our guys are terrorizing the beast's lair.
Putin's nutcracker is under drone attack. Kapustin Yar is an ordinary settlement where people still live. It is here, at the military testing ground, that Russia launches ballistic and cruise missiles designed to hit targets hundreds of kilometers away. And all of this is literally right next to where people live.
This is a place where various types of weapons are tested. And in this case, we're talking about the fact that there are simply launchers or test stands there that would allow for the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. I will always refer to the Oreshnik as a scaled-down intercontinental ballistic missile because we're not talking about any kind of medium-range ballistic missile here. In
particular, from that very place. On January 9th, Russia launched the Oreshnik at the Lviv region. But soon after, strikes also targeted the very testing ground from which the bunker dweller's deadly weapon is launched.
Kapustin Yar was attacked by drones. The central testing ground from where the Oreshnik is launched came under attack. Russia was unable to protect this strategic facility.
Moreover, this isn't even the first attack on the testing ground. Drones struck it even in the summer of last year.
there is already evidence confirming that strikes on Kapustin Yar have been carried out and were carried out with the aim to destroy the launchers that could be used to carry out strikes on Ukrainian territory. Therefore, in principle, there are quite a few unremarkable things there that can be destroyed, thereby reducing Russia's potential to use this type of weaponry. Another very important aspect of the strikes on Kapustin Yar is the opportunity to strike at test samples or at a warehouse of partially finished products.
But what's interesting is that missiles intended for Ukraine are increasingly landing in Russia, and not always gently. This even applies to Putin's very own Oreshnik, with which he so fervently tries to intimidate the world.
Oreshnik. On February 6th, Russia allegedly launched a second missile of the same type, which was aimed at Kyiv. Sirens sounded in the city, but no strikes followed. The missile did not travel far and exploded on Russian territory.
And it's not just about Oreshnik. There's another missile that the bunker dwellers use to threaten the whole world. Sarmat. But it hasn't even been launched yet. Well, actually, it was launched twice, but both times it crashed in Russia itself. So what's the secret behind such successes of the Russian Federation? What, it crashed?
Yes, it crashed.
The catastrophic results of those frequent crashes, massive explosions during launch, and various failed launches are becoming clear. This is primarily because Russia has unfortunately lost the critical ability to access high-quality technical capabilities, or has completely lost the essential technical base that is currently located within the borders of Ukraine. Of course, they still have engineers, they are working, they are trying to create something.
What is supposed to be a weapon against Ukraine sometimes turns into a threat to the Russians themselves. And Ukrainian drone strikes on key Russian military infrastructure only amplify this effect.
Chisinau delivers a blow to the empire's gut. The Republic isn't just slamming the door and leaving the useless CIS, but is forcefully kicking Russian troops off its land. Maya Sandu is giving a masterclass on how to say goodbye to occupiers. Tough and without sentiment. The Kremlin is squealing in helplessness, losing its last foothold in the region. And for us, that's one less headache at the border and a stunning slap in the face. For Putin, we'll explain the specific benefits for Ukraine in this segment.
To Putin's numerous strategic defeats, Moldova is now added as well. Chisinau is officially starting the process of leaving the Commonwealth of Independent States, a structure that is still referred to in the region as a political tool of the Kremlin. Moldovan Foreign Minister Mihai Popsoi stated that the country no longer intends to remain in the orbit of Russia's post-Soviet influence.
The Republic of Moldova will no longer be an official member of the CIS. And this process has already begun.
This concerns three key documents at once: the 1993 CIS Charter, the Agreement on the Establishment of Cooperation from December 1991, and its annex. These are the documents that legally formalize the country's participation in the CIS. We
recently made this decision, the approval process has begun, and at the start of the new parliamentary session, the documents on the denunciation of these agreements will be submitted to the legislators. In
the government, they expect to complete all procedures by mid-February, after which the final decision will be made by Parliament. Thus, Moldova is effectively withdrawing from one of the last formats where the Russian Federation could exert influence. Today, Moldova remains a country where Russian intelligence services maintain active influence, and attempts to destabilize the situation are systematic in nature.
What saves us is that we don't share a border, and that the Ukrainian armed forces are holding their ground.
Against this backdrop, discussions about Moldova's strategic choice are growing louder, including the possibility of a referendum on joining Romania. For Chisinau, this is seen as the fastest and most legitimate way to simultaneously join the European Union and NATO without years of negotiations and complicated procedures.
For them, in my opinion, this is probably one of the most logical and strategically obvious solutions available in this specific situation, because having such a significant and influential, well, by our current standards, powerful partner as Romania, it will be much easier for them to fully integrate, and economically speaking, it will also be considerably easier for everyone involved.
Such a scenario radically changes the balance of power around Transnistria, a region that for decades was a tool of pressure for Moscow, under the new circumstances is turning into a serious burden for the terrorist state. Without a land corridor, without proper communication, and without real support. For the Kremlin, Transnistria risks.
This journey often results in a state where one finds themselves cut off from the world, ending up in isolation. It is a situation where connections to others slowly fade away, until there is nothing left but silence and solitude, creating a lasting impact on an individual's well-being and making it difficult to find a way back to their former community. Every single part of this is currently now being heavily restricted. And that is why Moldova, by taking this approach, is effectively creating a vacuum around the region of Transnistria.
This is exactly what Moscow fears the most.
For us, this is an absolute advantage, because in the future, we will successfully secure Ukraine's entire coastline, making it completely safe and secure. In this specific situation, we will find ourselves in a much more significantly enhanced state of safety. There will be no threat coming from the territory of Transnistria. For Ukraine, there is still the Russian army.
The loss of Moldova means not just another diplomatic blow, but the collapse of the entire logic of Russia's presence in southeastern Europe. A region that was considered a foothold of influence is gradually slipping out of the Kremlin's control.
In the Celestial Empire, chaos reigns. The Chinese dictator has broken loose. Zhang Yuxia, the number 2 man in the Chinese army, the top general, and, attention, a personal friend of Xi himself, has been arrested. Along with him, the chief of the general staff has also been thrown into prison. The head of China is deeply afraid of a military coup. His childhood friend was the godfather to 1,000 generals whom he personally promoted. And now, these same 1,000 generals, with their armies, missiles, and tanks, see that their leader has been removed. What will they do? The master of the Middle Kingdom believes they will march on Beijing.
This is not a purge at all. A storm has erupted within the top ranks. A coup d'etat has taken place. Xi Jinping is very afraid of troops invading Beijing. Xi ordered all troops to remain in their positions and not to move. In
the capital of China, there is an atmosphere of fear. The dictator's order is strict. Everyone must stay put, no advances allowed. Military units have been put on highest alert, combat readiness level 1. But not to fight an external enemy, rather to protect Xi's own head from his own soldiers. All communication with the outside world in the garrisons has been cut off. This is isolation. Western media, Reuters, Bloomberg, are simply in shock. They write openly, Xi has destroyed the top military leadership with his own hands. Now there are barely any members left in the military council. Experts say there is no more loyalty. There is only primal fear. The head of the Celestial Empire has crossed the line. He has started attacking his own people, and that always ends badly.
Bloomberg agency stated outright that after the arrests of Zhang Yuxia and Liu Zhenli, there are only 2 people left in China's top military decision-making body. The Associated Press agency emphasized that this is the largest and most thorough purge in the military since coming to power. of Xi Jinping. The shock is caused not only by the anti-corruption campaign itself, but also by the fact that Xi Jinping dealt with his closest associates.
Historians are already comparing Xi to the last emperor of the Ming dynasty who hanged himself from a tree when all his generals betrayed him. The circle has closed. The dictator sits in a golden cage, surrounded by traitors and enemies he himself has created. A rebellion could break out at any moment. If the army decides to march on Beijing, there will be no one to stop them.
This incident points to a structural split within the Chinese army and demonstrates Xi Jinping's complete lack of trust in the military system.
But what is the reason for such a coup? According to Chinese media, it was a failed plan to arrest the president of China. Evening January 18th, a closed hotel for the military elite where Xi often stays. The conspirators, his very childhood friend, and the former chief of the General Staff of China didn't even move their families out so as not to arouse suspicion. Everything was prepared for the assault. So why did the plan fail? Betrayal. Exactly 2 hours before the operation began, someone leaked information to Comrade Xi, and he reacted instantly. The head of the PRC secretly left the hotel without saying a word and left an ambush in his place.
Zhang and Liu were confident in the success of this operation. Moreover, protecting their families was no longer relevant. If they had taken care of their families in advance, the operation would have been exposed. Moreover, Xi had already planted countless spies within their families.
The general's men didn't know that the plan had been compromised. The assault vanguard stormed into the hotel and walked right into a trap. A real shootout broke out. It was a full-on brawl, Xi's personal guard against the Special Forces conspirators. There were casualties on both sides. It was only after this battle that the arrest of the generals was officially announced.
Zhang Yuxia's side didn't know that the information had leaked to Xi Jinping. And as usual, they sent in the vanguard to take action. The Qingxi forces who arrived at the hotel got into a shootout with people organized by Xi Jinping, resulting in casualties on both sides.
China no longer trusts not only its internal colleagues, but also external ones. Beijing blames Putin for the loss of Venezuela. The Chinese invested billions there, and Moscow carelessly squandered their interests. But that's not all. Real paranoia has begun in Beijing. They are convinced that Putin has secretly made a deal with Washington behind their backs. How is Xi Jinping punishing Russia for incompetence and double-dealing? Find out right now in the story.
Not friends, not partners, but master and subject. This is exactly how the relationship between China and Russia has been described lately. And as you might have guessed, the power and authority are in Beijing's hands. Even though the Kremlin insists year after year that China is their brother, friend, and partner.
Our relationship is equal, mutually beneficial, and not opportunistic. The People's Republic of China, it is of an unprecedentedly high level. And it is based on mutual trust in China, our strategic partner and ally.
In reality, however, with each passing year, Russia increasingly resembles a vassal of China, a raw materials appendage, or a profitable asset, at least for now.
China has effectively made Russia its junior partner.
And sometimes,
Russia even acts almost like a proxy for China. And this is something we also need to understand.
Another nail in the relationship between the countries was Putin's silent acceptance of the fate of his Venezuelan partner, Nicolás Maduro.
We strongly urge and call upon the American leadership to promptly and unconditionally release the rightfully and legitimately elected president of this sovereign and independent state and his spouse.
This, you could say, was Russia's only reaction to the events in Venezuela. But the absence of Moscow's usual tirade about how bad the West is not the only reason for China's doubts about Russia. As reported by The Times, Beijing has begun to doubt Russia's reliability as a partner, since it suspects that Russia and the White House had some kind of agreement.
According to the publication source, the Russian authorities did not share their assessment of the situation in Venezuela with the Chinese. Nor did they inform them about the decision to withdraw their diplomats and their families from Caracas at the end of December. As a result, China was caught off guard by the operation of the American Special Forces. All of this caused irritation in Beijing and sparked heated discussions about the relationship between China and Russia. In some circles, there was even speculation that the silence of Russian air defense systems in Venezuela during the American raid was not a coincidence, but evidence of cooperation between Moscow and Russia. And Washington, writes The Times.
Now, people are saying that Xi Jinping will never forgive Putin for losing Maduro, and therefore for losing Venezuela as well, with all its resources.
There were economic calculations based on Venezuelan oil. China even built a huge oil refinery specifically designed for Venezuelan crude. There are differences. And basically, this plant can only process that type of oil. And it's known that Russia supplied its air defense systems to Venezuela. And after the fact, when the Americans carried out a special operation in Venezuela, it was captured. Maduro. And let's remember one more thing. That there were quite a lot of Russian mercenaries in Venezuela. There was even an entire Russian general who trained the Venezuelans in military tactics.
But that's not the main reason for the cracks in Russia's relationship with its eastern neighbor. As they say in Beijing, Russia has seriously damaged China's relations with Europe.
Although Russia's isolation due to the war in Ukraine has brought China economic benefits, the costs of the two countries growing closer are also obvious. This was noted in an interview shortly before Maduro's takeover by Professor Jiaxin Guo. He is the former dean of the School of International Studies at Peking University and one of China's most influential strategists. Among such costs, he mentioned the deterioration of current and future relations with Europe, adding that resolving the conflict in Ukraine would be beneficial for China.
China is considering this option despite the fact that it was the war that turned Russia into their vassal. At one time, China became something of a lifeline for sanction-hit Russia, but all this time, Beijing has viewed the Russian Federation not as a partner, but rather as a raw materials hypermarket where everything is 50% off. Even within the Russian government, there have been several anonymous statements saying that China is simply exploiting Russia and that this is plundering, not partnership.
This is the current China. It is ruthlessly turning us into a raw materials colony, crushing our real sector with a flood of its own production, its goods. We're just raw materials, guys, and China wants to keep us in a half-strangled state.
But today, the economic profit can no longer make up for the damage that the friendship between Russia and China is causing China.
China is starting to experience not only benefits from this war, but also losses. Let's recall the issue with the military exercises in Belarus when there was a provocation, Russian drones against Poland. And Poland closed its border, while 10% of China's exports to Europe go through Belarus.
That's why it seems Beijing has started to distance itself from Moscow, including economically. For the first time in 5 years, trade between China and Russia has decreased.
From January to November, China reduced its purchases of Russian oil by 7.6% to 91.5 million tons. At the same time, in monetary terms, exports collapsed by 20% due to falling prices and discounts, according to experts from the Gaidar Institute citing Chinese customs data. China's imports of petroleum products dropped by 3% for light distillates and by 33% for heavy ones. Meanwhile, in terms of value, deliveries plummeted by 33% and 40% respectively.
Oil trade is barely staying afloat, though even here everything is unstable. China sometimes reduces oil imports from Russia and sometimes increases them. China's interest is sustained only by the record low price that Russia offers them.
Russia sells oil to China and India and does so at a significant discount. According to the latest data, the actual price of Russian oil in China reaches as low as $36 per barrel. And that is, at some oil fields, it's even below production cost. So effectively, China is gaining a significant profit from its ally.
Another blow to Putin was China's refusal to buy Russian electricity. Kommersant reports that imports of electricity from Russia have been completely halted despite the contract. And that's all because energy from Russia has become too expensive for China. There are zero benefits from the contract. Moreover, China reacted very calmly to the alleged drone attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on Putin's residence. And that's simply because they absolutely don't care. Russia doesn't maintain particularly partnership-like relations with China, even in the Central Asian countries. Beijing has long set its sights on what Russia considers its spheres of influence and is actively deepening its ties with the countries of Central Asia.
Russia, in the eyes of the Central Asian countries, an unreliable partner, and indeed China is becoming increasingly active in its expansion. You know, in Russia, they like to call this region Russia's soft underbelly. And lately, China has been moving in there very actively, especially into Kazakhstan. And what's important and interesting is that after the start of the large-scale invasion, Xi Jinping paid a visit to Kazakhstan, where the joint declaration following the visit resembled more of a warning to Russia regarding possible expansionist plans. As if to say Kazakhstan's national security is China's national security and so on.
The Kremlin doesn't have enough strength to compete with China, so Putin even swallowed the fact that after 27 years of discussions, China, together with Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, is building a railway to Europe, bypassing Russia. But it's not just about economic and strategic interests alone. After all, China has set its sights on Russian territory as well, specifically the resource-rich Far Eastern region. But in exchange for perks from China, Putin is ready to swallow even this. This is also confirmed by the fact that a couple of years ago, Russia practically gifted 2 islands to Xi Jinping and now has allowed large-scale logging around Lake Baikal. That is why today, China is effectively absorbing a Russia that is dependent on sanctions, which has long since become merely an asset for Beijing, an asset that Xi Jinping uses as leverage in negotiations with Europe. But as soon as this stops being beneficial for China, the geopolitical game with Russia will be over.
Meanwhile, coups are happening not only in China. The Syrian government has decided to show Putin's soldiers the door. This is about the complete elimination of the Russian base in the north of the country. The Great Friendship is over and now the occupiers are being asked to pack their bags. How yesterday's allies are giving a kick to the Kremlin thugs. Watch next.
The Syrian government is planning to ask Russian military personnel to leave one of its 3 airfield bases, Kemishli.
Those who, I repeat, pay wages, want to present everything that is happening in Syria as some kind of failure, a defeat for Russia. I assure you that this is not true.
The Russians are negotiating with the new authorities in Damascus to keep the other 2 military bases in Tartus and Khmeimim. At the same time, Russia has withdrawn a significant portion of its military equipment from Syria.
We maintain relations with all the groups that control the situation there, as well as with all the countries in the region. The vast majority of them tell us that they would be interested in having our military bases remain in Syria.
For about a year now, the new president of Syria has been unsuccessfully requesting Moscow to extradite the ousted dictator Assad and provide financial compensation. Meanwhile, Assad is living a secluded and luxurious life in an elite penthouse in Moscow City. He spends most of his time playing video games and learning Russian.
Thank you that despite the traumatic situation in your country, you nevertheless responded to our request and came to Russia.
As you know, Bashar Assad fled Syria. He took a huge sum of money from the country and secretly smuggled it abroad. We want those who are protecting him to return him so that he can be held accountable in Syrian courts.
Furthermore, we shouldn't forget that before the coup, Putin called the current Syrian authorities terrorists, and Russian troops helped kill Syrians for years.
2 stations have been established here and will operate on a permanent basis. The bases are located in Tartus and here in Khmeimim. And if the terrorists raise their heads again, we will strike them with blows they have never seen before. In just over 2 years, the Russian armed forces, together with the Syrian army, have defeated the most capable group of international terrorists.
Now, however, Putin has changed his tune very quickly and declared that, as it turns out, it was Russia that helped put an end to terrorism in Syria.
Even those groups that once fought against Assad's regime, against government forces, have also undergone internal changes. It's no coincidence that today many European countries and the United States want to establish relations with them. If they are terrorist organizations, then why are you getting involved with them? So that means they've changed, haven't they? And that means to a certain extent the goal has been achieved.
They even had to accept Syria's new leader and hypocritically pretend that everything was going as it should.
In the Russian Federation, we have never maintained any diplomatic relations with the nation of Syria that were strictly tied to our internal political situation or any specific special interests. Throughout our long history of cooperation, we have always been consistently guided by the fundamental principles of international law, mutual respect for sovereignty, and a commitment to regional stability.